Welcome back, speed lovers. This is part 2 of the Monteverdi story, so if you haven't seen the first part yet, make sure to check it out later. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've decided to support the channel, thank you so much. It truly helps its growth. Now, buckle up, we're starting. In 1973, the second version of the Shark was introduced. That's exactly what the German word high means. Since the Hemi engine was no longer available at that time, the new model, the High 450 GTS, used Chrysler's 440 cubic inch 7.2-liter V8 Magnum, producing 385 horsepower. In the early 1990s, after Monteverdi had officially ceased to exist, one, or according to some sources, two, more high 450 models were assembled from leftover parts. However, they are considered replicas of the original cars, meaning the official production run amounted to just 2 units. Meanwhile, Peter began turning his attention to another segment of the ultra-luxury market, the 4-door sedan segment. As early as 1967, the Italian company ISO, which also used American V8 engines in its cars, had introduced the Rivolta S4 sedan. And when De Tomaso presented its own 4-door model, the Deauville, in 1970, Monteverdi could no longer stand aside. In 1971, he unveiled the high-speed 375/4 sedan, available either with the 440 V8 or a detuned version of the 426 HEMI. As before, the design was developed by Carrozzeria Fisore, the company in which Monteverdi now held a controlling stake. At 531 centimeters in length, weighing just under 2 tons, and powered by a 390 horsepower Hemi engine, the Swiss super sedan high-speed 375/4 could hit 100 kilometers per hour in 6.9 seconds and reach a top speed of 250 kilometers per average. It was one of the fastest, if not the fastest, European 4-door cars of its time. Produced from 1971 to 1976, the 375/4 sold around 30 units. Its customers included not only wealthy Europeans, but also Americans and sheikhs from the Middle East. Monteverdi cars of the early 1970s were incredibly fast, comfortable, and luxurious. However, their Achilles heel was the poor quality of the bodies, which were manufactured in Italy at Fisore's facilities. In an effort to increase body production, something Monteverdi saw as the main bottleneck limiting sales, he insisted that Fisore replace traditional craftsmanship and quality control with more modern assembly line methods. Monteverdi even invested his own funds to purchase the necessary stamping equipment. However, this change had little effect on sales, but a significant one on quality. Unfortunately, for the worse. When the effects of the 1973 OPEC oil embargo began to take hold in Europe and the US, Monteverdi realized that the European design plus American muscle formula would soon stop working. The muscle was fading fast, and design alone, especially with declining body quality, wouldn't be enough. Companies that had followed the same formula, like ISO and Jensen, were already on their last legs, which couldn't help but concern Monteverdi. To make matters worse, in 1975, BMW terminated its dealership contract with Monteverdi, drastically cutting his cash flow. Still, the Swiss entrepreneur didn't give up. By 1976, he had a new plan. Instead of continuing to build unique cars from various sourced parts, Monteverdi decided to base future models on existing production vehicles. In today's terms, Monteverdi essentially became a tuning atelier in 1976. But Peter preferred a more elegant name for his renewed business: an automotive boutique. The first passenger car introduced by the Monteverdi boutique in 1977 was the Sierra sedan, based on the American Plymouth Volare, with a 5.2-liter V8 producing 158 horsepower. Fisore's craftsmen redesigned the front and rear ends and added a luxurious leather interior, while the technical base remained unchanged. In 1978, Monteverdi presented a convertible version of the Sierra, based on the Dodge Diplomat Coupe. The Sierra was produced from 1977 to 1980, with total production numbers ranging from 20 to 40 units, depending on the source. In 1982, Monteverdi introduced another luxury sedan, the Tiara, this time based not on a cheap American donor, but on the prestigious Mercedes-Benz S-Class W126. The car's front and rear were heavily modified, while interior changes were limited to new upholstery and a steering wheel. The Tiara came fully equipped with all S-Class options and offered, for an additional cost, a premium sound system with recording capability and even a television. Only 3 Tiaras were sold, unsurprising considering it cost nearly twice as much as the top-tier S-Class. However, the Sierra and Tiara were merely additions to Monteverdi's main lineup of the boutique era, 2 luxurious SUVs. The first, the Monteverdi Safari, debuted in 1976 and entered production in 1977. Monteverdi realized that the only large European luxury SUV on the market was the Range Rover, leaving plenty of room for competition. He was right. Priced at $88,000, modern equivalent, about 10% more than a Range Rover, the Safari breathed new life into Monteverdi's company. Based on the American International Harvester Scout, the Safari's exterior and interior were extensively reworked by Fiesole, giving it a more upscale and refined appearance than both the Scout and the Range Rover. Even the base Safari came with all-wheel drive, an automatic transmission, power windows, and a choice of 2 V8 engines, producing 156 or 169 horsepower. In its stronger configuration, the 2-ton Safari could reach 100 kilometers per hour in under 14 seconds and a top speed of 165 kilometers per hour, leaving the Range Rover's 135 horsepower 3.5-liter V8 far behind. Additionally, Monteverdi offered the Safari with Chrysler's massive 7.2-liter 440 V8, producing 305 horsepower and 529 Newton-meters of torque. This version could accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour in just 9 seconds and reach 200 kilometers per hour. Incredible figures for a luxury SUV of the 1970s. However, fuel consumption averaged an eye-watering 37 liters per 100 kilometers. About a year later, Monteverdi introduced another SUV, the Sahara. Essentially another rebodied Scout, it featured unique styling and a slightly lower price, quickly gaining its own customer base. Between 1977 and 1980, Monteverdi's boutique sold about 500 cars per year, several times more than in the early 1970s. This success came largely thanks to the introduction of luxury SUVs, which became particularly popular among wealthy clients from the Middle East. The late 1970s became the most successful and profitable period in Peter Monteverdi's career. In 1975, he founded a separate company called Monteverdi Design, which handled design and styling work for brands like Opel, Toyota, Subaru, and Ford. According to some sources, the Sierra name, later used by Ford for its 1982 European model, was purchased from Monteverdi. Beyond cars, Monteverdi Design also worked on luxury yacht styling and even released a series of 24-karat gold-plated wristwatches in 1978. The company's most famous project, however, was a batch of 4-door Range Rovers modified in partnership with Fiesole and sold from 1980 to 1982. These cars featured leather interiors, 4 doors instead of 2, and several exterior tweaks. Initially, they were built in Switzerland, but due to growing demand, production was later taken over by Land Rover itself, though the cars continued to wear Monteverdi Design badges. Depending on the source, between 170 and 300 of these modified Range Rovers were produced over 2 years. In 1980, International Harvester discontinued the Scout, but continued to supply Monteverdi with parts for Safari production until the model was phased out in 1982. By the early 1980s, Monteverdi's business was strong and profitable. However, Europe's economic climate began to deteriorate, and the automotive market shifted dramatically. At that point, Peter Monteverdi realized his company could no longer remain competitive. He made the difficult decision to end all car production. Monteverdi officially ceased operations in 1984, followed shortly by the closure of Fiesole. The Tiara thus became the last official Monteverdi model. Throughout its history, the company sold around 2,700 SUVs, bringing total production across all models to just over 3,000 cars. With no financial worries, Monteverdi began buying back the rarest examples of his own cars. By 1985, he had amassed a collection of about 50 vehicles and opened the Monteverdi Museum in his hometown of Binningen, in the same building that once housed his workshop. For several years, he devoted himself to the museum. But when it grew dull, he bought the struggling Onyx Grand Prix Formula One team in 1990. Monteverdi personally worked on the F1 car designs for the 1990 and 1991 seasons. But Onyx's finances were in such poor shape that the team didn't survive to 1991. Still, Monteverdi tried to make the best of it. Using leftover F1 chassis, he created a new, ultra-modern supercar, powered by a 3.5-liter Ford Formula One engine, producing 658 horsepower. The car, called the Monteverdi High 650 F1, debuted in 1992. It could reach 335 kilometers per hour, accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.2 seconds, and hit 200 kilometers per hour in just 8 seconds. Weighing only 850 kilograms and using real F1 technology, the High 650 F1 drew huge attention and even received several pre-orders. However, none were ever delivered. Monteverdi had set an astronomical price of 850,000 Swiss francs, over $1 million in 1992. For comparison, the last Ferrari F40S cost half that. Only 3 prototypes were built, 2 red and 1 pearl white display model. All ended up in the Monteverdi Museum. After the failure of the revived Shark, Peter Monteverdi never returned to car building. He died of cancer 6 years later in 1998 at the age of 64 in his apartment located directly above his museum. After his death, the museum's curator became Paul Berger, who had worked with Monteverdi since the company's early years. In late 2016, the Monteverdi Museum in Binningen closed its doors. Today, the building houses a bicycle shop, but fortunately, the Monteverdi collection wasn't sold off. It was moved almost entirely to the Swiss Museum of Transport, where it now occupies an entire floor. The legacy of Peter Monteverdi continues to live on, delighting classic car enthusiasts around the world.